I'm Lucy Johnston, and this is GB News Originals. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome my guest today, Graham Linehan, the creator of Father Ted, The IT Crowd, and Black Books, once one of Britain's most celebrated comedy writers, and now one of its most polarising voices. We first met at a comedy club after he'd been cancelled, a strange place perhaps to meet a man accused of having no sense of humour left. But the crowd still laughed, and the controversy hadn't dimmed his conviction. Earlier this year, Graham was arrested at an airport over a tweet defending women's rights in the trans debate. After weeks on police bail, the Met dropped the case and later announced it would stop investigating so-called non-crime hate incidents. Graham, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Well, we'll start with that arrest. So, when armed officers turned up at the airport over a tweet, did you think it was real at first or some kind of surreal joke?
No, I thought it was real. This was not the first time I dealt with the police in a situation like this. This was like the third time. The first time they phoned my house and told me to stop bothering a convicted sex offender and serial fraudster because he had, changed his name multiple times in his career, and he happened to change his name this time to a female one, and so discovered a way of manipulating both the police and ordinary people by telling people he was a woman. Um, they came to me on his behalf. The second time was on the orders of a disgraced doctor, Adrian Harrop, who is now trying to make a new life for himself in Canada, in Calgary. He's moving to Calgary to join a gender clinic there. Um, and the third time, I believe, was on the orders of a trans activist who's now suing me in civil court. So basically, I've had a decade. This is just the thing at the airport is just the latest in a decade of trans activists trying to pile as much stress on me as possible, trying to make sure that, the news reports report that I've been arrested, but not what the details are or why or what's going on. And the press over the last 10 years has been happy to report all these events using the language of the trans activists. So, for instance, they'll say that I've attacked a young woman and all this sort of stuff. So yeah, it's been the surreal kind of mad side of it that you asked about has been in place for me for about 10 years. I wouldn't have thought it would be possible to get into trouble for saying that a man is a man and a woman is a woman. But what I didn't realize is I was getting into all the trouble in the world, and yeah, this is just so this particular incident. Surprise is not the word. It was a different feeling,
Yeah.
almost inevitability.
Yeah. So yeah, you were yeah, it was not a shock. You just sort of went with it. And the case has obviously now been dropped, and the
Mm.
Met say they won't investigate toxic culture war debates. Do you
Yeah.
see that as a victory or just sort of damage control? Do you think that there is still a problem with
Yeah, I think it's damage control. I mean, I can't remember. Has anyone said yet? I wonder whether hate crimes, non-crime hate incidents, which they've said they're going to stop investigating. Does anyone know if they're going to stop recording them? Because really, the problem is not the investigation. The problem is the fact that these things are being recorded, put against our name, and sometimes people won't even know until they try and go get a job and it turns up under a deep check or something. So I don't know whether the police are just trying to calm the situation. They know they made a terrible mistake in arresting me. I think they got me. I think I was de-arrested very quickly when they realized my blood pressure was so high that I was actually in danger. I don't think they wanted me to die in custody. So, it's a big smack in the nose for the police, but whether they've learned any lessons, I'm not sure. They just seem to be like wind-up toys that any kind of dishonest or uh, opportunist person can just use to be their own private force, you know. So we'll see, I guess. We'll see in the long term whether they'll stop knocking on people's doors for their opinions, you know.
Yeah, I think I understand that they are still able to use tweets and record them and investigate what they think may be more harmful or dangerous activity. So yeah, it's not kind of necessarily over yet. But
Mm.
just tell us, what were those weeks like, so personally, emotionally, and the time you had, financially, you've had a tough time as well. Just talk a little bit
You,
about that.
you mean over the last 10 years?
Well, but over the last 10 years, yes, that's been difficult. But yeah, just starting with the weeks just after your arrest. And yeah, we'll go on to the sort of longer term.
Oh yeah. Well, you know, well, to be honest with you, the weeks after my arrest were, you know, some of the best times I've had in this fight, you know, after years of trying to get people to pay attention, of trying to get the word out. Now I'm being interviewed quite a lot, and it's given me a platform that I didn't have before. I had a platform, I had my platform, my Substack, and so on, but I didn't really have, and Twitter. I have the platform of Twitter, but with Twitter, you really don't know if your stuff is going out into the ether because the restrictions on excuse me, the restrictions on your reach are very tight still because there's still remnants of the old Twitter and they kind of don't really want people talking about this, you know. So you're so it's hard to know, you know, whether anything you're saying on that platform is being taken seriously. But being able to go onto, you know, news channels like Piers Morgan and Megyn Kelly and tell some of the stories that have been accumulating over the last 10 years, some of the stories that are so awful, they're hardly believable, you know. But I think people are more receptive now because they know there's men in women's prisons. They know there's men in women's sports. It's undeniable by now. And so it's just I don't know, it's a great time to be able to say, yeah, you're not imagining things. And you're not insane for questioning it. You know, this is a dangerous deluded, incoherent belief system, and it's causing a lot of trouble, you know. And the more people we can snap out of it before they do something irreversible to their bodies, the better. Because I genuinely think that the people who've had so-called gender affirming care, which is like, gosh, is such a Orwellian use of language because it is anything but care. You know, it's destroying someone's life. You know, it's destroying someone's life, and not only that, but children. It's often destroying children's lives. You know, because their parents have this rat-like idea in their brain that, oh, my child was meant to be a different sex. It's an insane idea, and you know, the sooner it's cast to the past, like things like the Salem witch trials and tulip fever and the dancing plague of the Middle Ages, and you know, all these examples of mass delusions in the past, the better we'll all be for it.
Do you think that, well, do you think it's even possible that people feel they are born in the wrong bodies? You've mentioned to me before that you have transsexual friends, that it isn't an issue for you. Do you not believe this is a phenomena at all?
It's not so much that I feel that we it, it's that I feel that a real medical condition that's suffered by an incredibly small amount of people was turned by some incredibly foolish and fashionable people into something desirable. You know, trans was turned into something that was a fashion, an achievement. There's lots of trans accounts that say things like "we recruit," you know, and that's what it is. It's recruitment. It's not a real feeling of dysphoria. It's simply a drive to recruit a group of people who all consider themselves in the same tribe with the same very, very left-wing point of view. And yeah, it's got really nothing to do with dysphoria, the current version of trans, and because the current version of trans is such a wide um, uh, uh, what's the word? It covers so many people that it's meaningless. So trans means some kid who puts black fingernail polish on because he wants to look cool when he goes to the club. You know, that's considered the same as someone who has crippling dysphoria, cannot think about anything else until they get an operation to take care of it. I know the trans woman or the trans identified Debbie Hayton described it like that. It was like a bug in his brain that he had to, as soon as he heard it, he had to do it. He couldn't get rid of this
Yeah.
persistent thought in his head. And the problem is that this is, it's almost like they're trying to sell anorexia to the public. It's like that's kind of what it's like. It's like and there are like many communities online that do that. They encourage anorexia in each other. They encourage the idea of going down to a perfect weight, um, and they are sort of, I guess, proudly tribal in that kind of pursuit. And that's like a small cultish and strange section of the internet, right?
So
And
you think the
luckily,
dysphoria
and
is
I'll
actually an
just
environmental, it's not in in nature, it's not
well,
innate.
yeah. I mean, basically, let me. That's what I'm saying is like that group, that anorexia group, is not. It hasn't broken out the way the trans movement did, but it could easily have done so. They could easily have said rather than we need to help these girls who are starving themselves to death, they could easily have said, "Who are you to say that these girls what these girls can do with their bodies?" That's the trans argument, and trans is like a very very severe form of anorexia. You get all these girls, they at the same time they're going through puberty and they're given this out. They don't they're afraid of the male gaze. They're afraid of their developing bodies, like every kid when they go through changes. And unfortunately, that process has been hijacked by a bunch of opportunists who want to pretend that this is actually the new gay or the new civil rights movement, and it's not. It's a busted flush. It's like kind of gender bending things in the past, like let's say David Bowie fandom or New Romantics or some aspects of punk. All of these groups were playing around with similar things. But unfortunately, with music, you could simply wear whatever you wanted to wear, have the kind of childhood and teenage life that you wanted, and then you moved on. But this is that spirit, and it's being tattooed onto kids for their lives, and they will never be able to remove some. They'll never be able to undo some of the things they've decided to do. And I don't think that dysphoria is the right word to explain everybody who says they're trans. I think yes, there's probably some people who are suffering from dysphoria, but I think that kind of that there's also I know like I'll give you an example. Kids are when kids are asking for hormones, Novara Media did this, the very left-wing title. They're encouraged to tell their doctors lies to get the hormones. So when the doctor says, have you committed suicide? The answer is always, or have you tried to commit suicide? The answer is always yes. And Novara Media actually gave a guide to how to do this. And then they blame detransitioners when they say, "Oh, you should have known what you're getting into." It's like you told them to lie to their doctors. So it's I think that people need to move from worrying too much about the very small number of individuals who are suffering from gender dysphoria and move to the wider issue of people who are not suffering from it, who've been convinced they are, who've been convinced that being trans is the answer to all their problems. And they're the ones that we have to help because apart from anything else, you won't be able to help people who really have dysphoria if everyone is saying they have dysphoria. Do you know what I mean? So the actual people that they claim to be worried about are the very ones who are not going to be well served because they are not going to get the help they need, you know?
You say that you plan to sue the police now. Do you think that will achieve anything? What do you think that?
I'm hoping it'll achieve some money. That's what I'm. That's. I mean, the cost
Yeah,
to my life of this. I mean, I've lost millions of pounds because of this, probably. With the Father Ted musical being banned and so on. So it would be nice to get some of the money back that I've paid in taxes in the UK, which was apparently going to fund these malicious complaints made against me, you know. It'd be nice to get some of that money back,
yeah.
and it'd be nice if the police were finally able to admit that they've been manipulated, you know. Like so the police are very pally with people who we know are extremely dangerous. And they don't seem to understand that. They don't seem to know they're dealing with, in one case, the sexual predator, in another case, a lunatic who was fired from the police for sending abusive emails, in another case, a doctor who was struck off briefly for their behavior online. They don't seem to care that they're working for the bad guys, you know? So
So,
we'll
yeah.
hopefully make them care about that.
Yes. Well, this is there's a shift. But you said to me once you started your this activism from a bed, a hospital bed, you had been treated for cancer. I'm just wondering what made you um, just sort of speak out so vociferously about gender issues. And many people say that, the tweets you do are quite aggressive. So what's driving that? Is there no sort of point which you think, well, I can just sort of debate this calmly?
Well,
What's going on?
the thing I always point out there is that very near the start of this, I signed a letter along with a group of other people asking Stonewall to try and produce a less toxic debate because whatever people think about me, it's nothing compared to what trans activists are doing to their victims, you know? I would get angry at the way I was being treated, at the way I was being ignored or deserted by my friends or the type of harassment I was receiving from trans activists, and I would respond to that. But at the very start of it, we tried to figure out this other way of doing it, of being polite, and Stonewall just said no. They said, no, we're not doing that. And the reason was that Stonewall were still clinging to the idea of no debate. And no debate is being used because the activists on the other side know that if the issues are discussed, they never come out well from them because there's no evidence, there's no everything's based on lies. The suicide stuff is based on lies. The epidemic of violence against trans people is based on lies. The hate crimes against trans people is based on a completely absurd idea of what constitutes a hate crime, like someone using someone's real name. All these things are they dissolve under scrutiny, and uh, and so they had this thing of no debate. So I signed this letter saying, "Hey, come on, let's talk about this and let's try and bring the temperature down." And so did James Dreyfus. Now I can't think of anything more polite and more reasonable than writing a letter to Stonewall saying, "Come on, let's bring the temperature down on this conversation." But for signing that letter, James Dreyfus has hardly worked again, you know? So this is what we're dealing with. When people call my conduct this or that, we're dealing with the most malicious group of people I've ever seen. Someone who would destroy a career because you asked for a debate. It it boggles my mind.
Well, I'm
And
sure
and when
Stonewall would defend itself and say that it hadn't been aggressive or malicious or anything like that. I mean, they would,
No, Stonewall wasn't, but they sit back while the foot soldiers
right.
do it. You know, I mean, Stonewall, for instance, you know, they should have made a very clear statement that J.K. Rowling has every right to talk about this issue. You know, she has every right to argue for female-only spaces. Why is that? Why did that ever become controversial? And what they do is they make these opinions somehow like here's a very good example of what they do, right? You can say anything about women's rights and they will call it a dog whistle. You know, that's a dog whistle about trans people, you know? And in fact, I've often seen when people are writing something that's nothing to do with trans people, someone will put underneath, what about trans women? You know? And it's like these men are constantly elbowing their way into these conversations, you know? So there's no escaping from it. And if you mount even the tiniest resistance to it, they try to destroy you. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you saw the photographs of the Philia conference, where you know it happened a few days ago. A women's conference, nothing to do with trans issues, and they destroyed the windows and forced the attendees to walk a gauntlet of intimidating men dressed in black. You know, that's what we're up against. You know, trans activists, like, I'm not saying they're all evil, but the way their tactics are evil. And many of them within the movement are just women-hating cowards who, you know, they would not do this if it was men. They would not be wearing black and intimidating a group of men, you know. So, yeah, we're up against, people have to realize what we're up against. We're up against a real force for evil, you know.
Do you regret getting involved with this, or do you think it was a sort of turning point you had to take because of what
Yeah.
it cost you?
No, well, you know, I couldn't be an artist and ignore the way the world is changing. And what I'm another thing I'm somewhat disgusted about with all my old friends in the industry is that they've all agreed with their wives or their kids that they're not going to talk about this. And I think that if you're ignoring something that's taken 10 years, if you're ignoring, probably if this all wins through, which would be a disaster for every woman in this country, but if they win, um, uh, you know, it will be the biggest social change. The idea that some men are actually women, it will be a massive social change. And you have all these comedians, and they won't write about it because they're scared. I mean, I think that's it's pathetic is one thing, but the other aspect to it is that it's just not a healthy society for artists. You know, you have to be able to tell the truth. And they are literally asking us to lie about certain people 24/7, you know, to make our brains adjust so that when we see a bloke with a beard who identifies as a woman, we have to adjust ourselves so that we refer to him as she when he leaves the room. And it's like, no, no, that's the worst kind of mind control or sort of autocratic nightmare. And it's dystopian. And I'm astonished that there's still even now, after 10 years of this, that my cowardly friends still haven't raised their heads and said a thing. You know, Jimmy Carr said something nice today about me, which I was delighted to hear, or a few days
Oh
ago.
yeah.
Yeah, so called me brave. So
Okay. And
that.
who has spoken up for you, and who was in touch? Has Elon Musk been in touch? Has J.K.
No,
been in touch?
no.
Not him.
James Dreyfus was the early person I got into this, and he has faced so little work since. You know, he was one of like the UK's better known comedy actors. Of course, he's an all-round actor, but he was known for his comedy, and they just let him just like with me, they let him die on they let him swing in the wind. You know, Kathy Burke, who was his co-star for years, she should have spoken up for in his defense, and she didn't. She just let him swing in the wind. You know,
What
so
about
I'm
J.K. Rowling? She tweeted as something supportive at when the Met dropped your case, wasn't it? She
yeah.
has she been in touch at all?
No, I think she only tweeted about me then because she was forced to. I don't know what I
About
did to annoy.
totalitarian. Yeah, go on.
Well, I don't know what I did to annoy J.K. Rowling, but you know, I had years of begging her to, you know, share my Substack or just acknowledge that I existed, and she never did. And I think in the end, when I was arrested, she was forced to. Um, and so, you know, I don't really feel much. You know, she's great what she's doing, and I really admire it. But you know, I will say, you know, Bill Mayer recently complained about me. He said because I was, I J.K. Rowling wrote about it beautifully, and Dave Chappelle is funny, but Graham Linehan is ugly about it. You know, and it's like, well, I'm not a millionaire. I'm not a billionaire. You know, I didn't have the safety net that they had. And in fact, Rowling was fully aware of my existence and didn't lift a finger to help for years. And you know, it's fine. She has her own reasons. Like I don't want to question it, but you do get a little bit resentful at people calling you ugly when, you know, your fight has been done against a background of constant debt, constant legal action, the police after me wherever I went, arrested me when I get off airports and stuff, and yet to never even have a nod from JK was really dispiriting for years. You know, I had to get arrested to be noticed by her, so I guess that's what it was. That was
But
the trick. I should have pulled it earlier.
do you think that people have said that some of your tweets are more aggressive, they're bullish, they're hateful in themselves? Do you not think that I mean, sure you've been asked this before, that you could have written in a more academic and thoughtful way?
Well, again, I'd love an example, you know, because like I'm
Well,
always
punch him
being.
in the balls. I mean, that's sort of
Oh,
not,
punch him in the balls, yeah. But that's like th that particular joke is pure desperation. Because when you know, my daughter's going to college, right? And I've been seeing things like there was a famous sign in I think at Brighton College that said, if you see a man in a woman's toilet, or it said, if you see someone who looks like they don't belong, and there was a list of things you're not to do. Don't stare at them. Don't make a scene. You know, don't do this, don't do that. That is the worst safeguarding advice you can give to a young woman, you know? And my safeguarding advice is the opposite. Make a scene, call the police, you know, because they are breaking the law. And if all else fails, you know, if someone won't get out of your space, punch them in the balls. And even that is like not a serious recommendation because really, you know, men are stronger than women, and it's a good idea not to get them angry, you know. So you have to be really sure that that shot in the balls really takes, you
but
know.
there will be trans men in women's toilets, or I mean, there'll be trans people in toilets that are not going to do anything. It's sort of assuming that these, group of people are all aggressive and potentially dangerous, but actually that must be a tiny, tiny, tiny proportion.
Well, the question is, which ones are they? Like, you know, there's something I call the rape test, you know. Do women have to be raped before they go, oh, that was a bad one. That must have been one of the bad ones. You know, the reason that we don't, and it's not, and it's not trans people who are not allowed in women's toilets. It's trans identified men.
Yeah.
In other words, trans women. And the reason that trans women are not allowed in women's toilets is because no males are allowed in women's toilets. Because you know the best phrase, the best way to remember it is the good ones stay out, so the bad ones stand out. So if you know, there's all this, you know, and you see all these people saying, "Oh, how are you going to police it?" You know, like a man can go in if he wants, and all this sort of stuff. And but it's a question of convention, and it's a question of having a society built on trust. You know, why would you want to break that societal taboo of going into a women's toilet? Why would you want to do that anyway? You know, and I just think that like any man who wants to get into to women's toilets is is the very person who shouldn't be allowed to, you know?
You've long been a nonconformist. Did you set out to be an activist?
No, I would have been perfectly happy writing sitcoms and being a family man and stuff, but it was just made impossible because I had this opinion that people didn't like, you know. Um, uh, but and the only reason I became an activist was because when I was hearing stories about how insane some of the incidents were, some of the things that they were doing to kids and some of the ways that women were being punished for standing up to it, it was so crazy, some of the things I was hearing, like one of the very first things I heard was when they nailed a dead rat to the door of a rape crisis center in Vancouver. Vancouver Rape Relief, which has been fighting for survival in Canada because Canada's gone mad on this stuff. You know, when
Who
you hear
nailed the rat to the door?
trans activists, you
Why?
know, because it wouldn't accept men.
Really?
Yeah. And that was like almost the very first thing I heard, and the very first thing that made me think, "Holy shit, these people are dangerous." Um, and so the things that were happening were so insane that I really had to hear them or read them two or three times before I could convince myself they were true. I had to make sure that I was getting multiple sources and so on and find out. And they all were true. And I guess because I was a comedy writer and because no one took me seriously on these matters, um, I guess people just thought I was making it up. And I think that even Stiga Bell, who of Times Radio, the other day I was talking about the kids being, uh, mutilated in gender clinics, and he just claimed that wasn't happening. It's like it's Jazz Jennings. They televised it. These things are not secrets, and yet they're secrets to a certain kind of legacy interviewer. It's strange. We all seem to be existing on two different tiers of reality. You know.
How much of your home life and your marriage and your career has this cost you? You've alluded to it earlier, but it's been pretty devastating by the sound.
Yeah, absolutely everything. But like, even my wife couldn't stop me standing up for her rights, or my daughter's rights. And I think that unfortunately, I think a lot of what's happening now is wives telling their husbands don't get involved, because to lose your social circles is a much bigger punishment to women than it is to men. You know, it was easy for me to lose my social circles because I don't know, being a man, you don't really rely on them as much, but it's scarier for women and it's tougher for women. So after a while, I just thought, well, this is too important not to talk about. So, let's separate and see how we get on. But the separation was permanent. Um,
She was targeted though, wasn't she? And terrified. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. She
So,
was the police turning up at our door was a big moment for her, and another thing that I'm hoping will be taken into account when I get,
yeah.
when we sue the police. Um, and yeah, she just didn't know how to deal with and another thing that happens is that basically when they can't get at someone like me because I'm stubborn and I won't be told, they go for the people in your life. So.
So the
Uh,
movement you joined to protect women, well, women's rights actually destroyed the relationship with someone who you were closest to. I mean, you must have some, do you have regrets of that? Or not?
Well, I did. Divorce is a tough thing, and I went through the period of being worried about it and stuff like that. But it is what it is, and in the end, I don't really, and I mean this of all my friends, all my ex-friends, I don't want people around me who don't, who can't support me against something that's so obviously evil and wrong, you know. Um, I'm astonished at the amount of friends who didn't even have a sort of a everyday casual conversation with people who weren't kind of connected with me in any kind of way because I was always a freelancer, and none of these people helped as well. In fact, the only person who did, I think I can say it now that he's come out and said it, the only person who did offer to meet me and offered me some support was Jimmy Carr. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
He was a gentleman.
Do you think that
When
makes him brave? I mean, yeah,
Well,
people that
yeah. I
stood
mean, he's
up for you.
braver than most. Most wouldn't even meet me. But Jimmy wasn't public for years because I understood this because Jimmy is one of these people who, if they really put their minds to it, they could cancel him. All they'd have to do is fixate on one or two jokes that he's done in the past, amplify them as much as possible, make it look like they're the only jokes he ever did, and then he'd be over, you know? So he was playing a careful game, and I admired that. I not admired, I understood that. But there's other comedians, who've built their careers on being anti-establishment and so on, and they were quiet as the grave, you know. So
Did
I
you
still find it extraordinary that they all decided to close ranks and look the other way on this, because just a few of them providing a different kind of take on what I was doing. Just one or two might have changed everything for me, you know. But unfortunately, it was just James Dreyfus, and they tried to destroy him.
you've spoken about feeling suicidal during lockdowns. What sort of pulled you back from that edge?
Well, no, I never really felt suicidal. I've always been on these antidepressants to keep everything sort of level. Um, uh, but you do go through times when the you're just constantly being smeared. There's nothing you can do to undo it. You try everything, and yet still the same kind of Wikipedia style version of you is the one that people are reacting to. And yeah, it can get to you. The sheer level of I used to call it my Second World War because it was 5 years long. But then I realized I'd been saying that for 5 years, and it was like 10 years.
Yeah.
So this has been 10 years of living in this strange world where people are pretending not to understand what the difference between boys and girls are. And 10 years, it can weigh on you. It can weigh on you. But uh, I have to say that the switch to the US has really helped. I feel like a new man over here, and I've got the space to write. I feel I've written a film. I've written a whole series of a sitcom. I've never been so productive or less likely to have anything produced. But I'm still working and I'm still enjoying it. And I'm building up a roster of projects that we will be able to go in and pitch and say, oh, you don't like that one? Well, how about this one?
Well,
And
yeah,
it's a good
I'm
way to
really
be.
interested in the whole concept of comedy and what you're doing. Are you going to write a sort of satire on or a sitcom on woke?
No,
Why
we
not?
because it's already in the rear view mirror.
Um,
When you're doing a sitcom, it has to be stuff that's about the next big social moment, And wokeism is
on the way
it,
down?
it's on the way down. It's declining. I mean, we tried to do it with the sitcom. The sitcom sort of addressed it, but we were very careful to avoid woke language, like words like cis and stuff like that, because we feel that will uh, it would be like making jokes about bell bottoms and Beatles wigs in 1980, So we're trying to figure that out because like even though the sitcom avoided all that language, it still feels like it's about the woke world. And we need to make that wider so that more people can enjoy it, not just people who've been following this issue. So
So how do you find the next thing? I mean, you've talked a lot in your book about comedy and how it becomes tribal and people write for a group or they write for everyone, but then you say they're writing for no one. So how do you feel your way in that and look for what is funny, really?
I don't know. I mean, one of the things about comedy is that you're noticing things that everybody else is somehow noticing, except you express it in such a way that they all laugh at the same time. Because, that's a strange thing. and for me to be supposedly out of step with society, it would mean that my insights would not have that effect on an audience. But I think they do, because like I genuinely think most people think are normal, well-adjusted people who would look at a phenomenon like this and see it for what it is. So I don't think that when I start writing, I mean, my situation in life is very weird, but I want to keep writing about people who are, just going. I mean, sorry, I'm all over the place in answering this
Not at
question, but
all. Yeah, it's a
the one
complex
thing
question.
I do want to write about is what people like the Darlington nurses are going through, and what Sandy Peggy is going through. The war on ordinary women, I think, is a really compelling one, and I was very glad to see Nick. Oh, his second name's jumped out of my head. Nick, is it Davis who did the post office scandal? Uh, uh, kind
Yes.
of, yeah,
Yeah.
he's been interested in it, and I've met him a few times, and he sees it as what it is.
You mean the
You know,
journalist, Nick Davis?
yes, Nick
Yeah.
Wallace, that's his
Oh,
name,
Nick
Nick
Wallace.
Wallace.
Okay. Yeah, there's
Yeah,
Nick
and
Davis, journalist as well. Yeah. So
uh,
yeah, so you're looking at ordinary people who are somehow being screwed by a
yes,
system. Yeah.
yes, like being caught up in this strange, um, agreed upon world. All these privileged middle class people agreed on it. They weren't consulted. No one really understood what it meant until, the Darlington nurses were fired for, or were got into trouble for saying this man shouldn't be in their spaces. And the same thing happened with Sandy Peggy, or in the Ireland, the prisoners in Limerick prison who were put in a cell with Barbie Kardashian or next to Barbie Kardashian. These are ordinary people who weren't versed in the stuff I was versed in. I knew all the statistics and all the arguments and how to debunk all their arguments. But this must have come out of the blue for most of them. Suddenly they're sharing a cell or a prison grounds with a man. They must have felt, wow, they must think they can do anything to us. And I just think that that's an interesting story when a bizarre top-down philosophy can hits real life and the problems that are created there. It's juicy stuff for fiction.
You lost your Catholic faith at 16, I understand, realizing that some of your early moral views were kind of, you said, naive, and I think you read Cider House Rules. But do
Mm.
you think that you see a similar kind of moral absolutism now on the progressive left?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I I was young when the priests kind of ruled Ireland, but I still recognize, a population that are a little bit in fear, you know, like the priests basically, they, our speech, what we were able to see in cinemas, all sorts of different things was tightly controlled by the Catholic Church in the 70s. Both Monty Python films were banned, The Life of Brian and, what was the other one that was banned? Oh yeah, the last one, The World According to like what was it? The last one? Oh, Life. I can't remember the last one. Anyway, last Python film. Both were banned. So there was a feeling of trying to keep the Irish pure, in the face of all this irreligiousness, all this kind of decadence. And it's a similar thing now. It's like, they're trying to keep certain people quiet. And the enemy isn't this time, isn't, well, yes, no, actually, the enemy is the same as the Catholic Church's enemy. It's the non-believers. It's the people who aren't going along with it. That's the enemy again. So for me, there's a lot of similarities between London at the moment and Dublin in the 90s,
Yeah.
or even late 80s. It's a similar feeling of a poverty of discussion and a poverty of imagination. And it's another reason why I'm so happy to be out of there.
But yet you wrote a whole series, Father Ted, satirizing the Catholic Church, and you were universally lauded for it, won awards, and yet your entire career has been wrecked over a tweet or a series of tweets. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, you see, the thing is, making fun of the Catholic Church was hip. So, the same people who escorted me out of the building, they were the ones who escorted me in. Even though our satire on Ted was actually very light and whimsical, it wasn't an attack. If it was an attack, we would have been writing about the scandals that the church was going through at the time.
Right,
But we still had a lot of affection for priests. And even though I
right.
was an atheist, there's a lot of things about priests and about religious people that I admire. So we were able to write a nuanced, silly, and gentle comedy about priests. It's another reason why I wouldn't write about this movement. I wouldn't be able to write a gentle comedy about this movement because, unfortunately, the truth of the movement is too upsetting. It would be impossible to watch. You'd be asked to laugh at some of the most awful things happening. And yeah, so it's not, so it's worse. It's worse. It's worse than the Catholic Church in that sense. It's harder to write about because it's so bizarre. You'd have to be writing about all these incoherent thoughts uh, uh, in people's brains. It'd be hard to pin characters down.
Yeah.
Um, but it would also be hard simply because the truth is so grim and so sad. And we really are seeing multiple generations sterilized because of this. And then the most cynical organization of all, Stonewall, inventing a new sexuality, which is not being interested in sex, asexuality. And it's like, well, how handy that you've developed this new sexuality when you've sterilized all these kids.
Well, who knows? I mean, who knows if some people are not there? Maybe some people out there, but some say that our lost attachment to the church, which was characterized by Father Ted, helped pave the way for this woke, what some people say is woke ideology that you oppose. Do you think that's right?
I do, I do, I do. I also feel like the person I was before I was cancelled, when I was a very obedient left-wing amplifier of left-wing ideas and anti-conservative ideas. Um, I feel that that led to it too. Uh, I see in all these guys shouting about Israel and uh, uh, shouting at abusing women. I see a kind of a. I mean, I would never have gone down the abusing women road because that was always my. I always felt you should stand up for women. But I could easily have gone down other roads. In fact, I remember I was very rude to the writer Susan Hill, who wrote one of my favorite ghost stories, The Woman in Black, because she was a conservative. And I'm ashamed of all that. I really wish I could go back and undo all that stuff. But when people say, would you rather have done something different or should you have done something different? They're usually talking about my trans stuff. And that's the stuff I fully 100% stand behind. And if another reason if I was being shocking and confrontational, it's because whenever we're polite and whenever we approach the subject gently, they try to destroy your life anyway. Look at J.K. Rowling. She started off writing incredibly considered tweets, and now she tweets more like me. Because, like, once you've faced it for a while, once you've seen how vicious these people are, you lose patience with the softly, softly approach. You have to, they keep calling you a bigot. So, why are we supposed to be polite in the face of that?
Do you think this sort of woke and this following this ideology, if you call it an ideology, do you think that's become a new religion
Yes, yes, because
where
it is.
belief overrides evidence? Is that what you think?
Yes,
Yeah.
faith-based. Faith-based. It's full of what you might call mysteries, the way religion's full of mysteries. Like, the Holy Trinity. How can there be three things in one person? All that sort of stuff. It's the same with the trans issue. It's a lot of stuff about uh, you know, s- cutting off pieces of your body to be fully whole. Like that's a religion. You know what I mean? Um, uh, uh, being respectful to, so like there's a sort of hierarchy within it, and my favorite story that I heard from all this was two trans identified girls. They were young girls, and they went to a trans sort of group that were meeting, like a LGBT youth group, something like that. And they said that the guy who ran it was a trans-identified man, saying he was a woman. And the first thing he did at the start of the class was he read out lesbian pornography to them, you know. And the second thing, or another thing that happened in that class was the young trans girls, the trans-identified girls now, were putting their hands up or asking to speak and so on. And the trans women were telling them they shouldn't speak so much because they had male privilege, because they were men. So these men were telling women to shut up because they had male
Yeah.
privilege.
It does your head in. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and that guy, the guy who ran that club was a guy called Morgan Page, and he was on the Stonewall website for years, despite the fact that he ran a workshop called Overcoming the Cotton Ceiling. And the cotton ceiling is the idea that lesbians do not want to sleep with trans-identified men, and this was a way of getting around that. So it
yeah.
was essentially a class on how to sexually harass lesbians, if
Yeah.
you're a man.
Yeah.
So the fact that Stonewall, had this guy as a advisor until I really think only about 2 years ago they took his name off the site is another scandal in a whole long list of scandals.
Do you think, though, that you're looking at this through the prism of what you've experienced, the attacks on you, that there's a whole community out there that is not nasty, aggressive, they just want to get on and they're actually quite happy with the way that they are or have become?
Yeah, well, I mean, if they're happy, then why are they so angry at women standing up for their rights?
Not all
Why?
of them necessarily are.
No, sure, and I'm friends with a lot of them who don't, and a lot of trans people who work from a gender critical viewpoint.
Yeah.
Plenty of trans people know they're male or female. They know what their real sex is. They're just saying, well, I'm just more comfortable like this,
Right.
and
You
and
don't have a
and
problem with that?
no, not at all. Why would I? You
No.
know, like as we constantly say, the only time this becomes a problem is in about four or five areas. It's women's sports, it's women's safe spaces. It's things like rape crisis centers. These are the places that need to be kept sacrosanct, where biological reality needs to be applied. Outside of that, live your life, have a great time. But don't expect us all to kind of go along with your view of yourself when your view of yourself is so at odds with what other people see. You know, I don't know if you saw, but over the weekend, Kelly J. Keane spoke to this trans-identifying guy, and he was just this hugely fat guy, hugely tall, towering over Kelly J, saying that he was going to use women's spaces and saying that he was attacked when he was going into men's spaces. Clearly a lie, because no man who looked like him would be attacked when he goes into women's spaces, you know. And again, it showed how low the bar is for becoming a trans person, because all you literally only have to say, I'm a trans person, you know. So yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, no, you did. You absolutely
okay.
did. And I think it's really clear that you don't have a problem with any trans people. It's just the trans activism, which you have compared to totalitarianism movements and puberty blockers to Nazi eugenics.
Yes,
Those comments drew really heavy criticisms, but you absolutely stand by those.
absolutely, absolutely. They have no idea what they're doing to these kids' systems, and they're doing it anyway. And I think they're doing it. A lot of doctors are doing it because I mean, the history of medicine is not a pretty history. They used to dig up great bodies to work on them. They used to torture poor people to discover whether certain things worked and didn't work. But at the same time, we have guardrails that stop doctors from engaging in something I genuinely think a lot of the reason doctors are doing this is they're curious. They want to see what happens, you know? And I think that I think that that's not a good way to think about childhood development, you know? The one of the things one of my friends is a detransitioner, ex-Lancic, and she documents all these kids who are TikToking their medical journeys, and it's just full of medical complications, because these procedures are experimental, and they're doing things that there's a famous scene in Jazz Jennings, who had the transitioning operation when he was 16. And he, like Susie Green, had been on puberty blockers for his whole life. So his penis wasn't big enough to form the vagina that they wanted to form. And there's a famous footage of the two surgeons arguing during the surgery, arguing during the surgery. And Exi Lancic points out, she said, "Do you know why they're arguing? It's because this is all experimental. This is the first time they've done this, you know? And when you look at it like that, when you realize that that's what's going on, you can't really look back. You can't be what's the word? You can't have equanimity over the fact that children are being hurt for no reason, you know?
Although
Like,
presumably there are surgeons who've done plenty of those operations and would say it's not experimental. We've done these before and we've had good outcomes, presumably.
yeah, but then, they say that, but you look at the evidence of all these kids doing their TikTok recovery videos, and it's all stuff like, well, there was a slight split, and I have to go back tomorrow to get it fixed. There's a trans activist in Ireland. She's either talking about going to the hospital or coming back from the hospital. And or sorry, when she tweets, she's either tweeting about going to the hospital or coming back from the hospital. Her life is a series of hospital visits, because these procedures aren't, proper medical procedures. The W Path, who is supposedly the world leader in these procedures, there was a document that came out called the W Path Files
In
that
America, yeah.
yeah, it just revealed they're making it up as they go along,
I
And
think
I think
the
what we all have is this feeling that no, surely an organization as important as that wouldn't do that. But I'm afraid, it has. It somehow these crazy ideas made their way into medicine, and there's a thing in medicine called the chain of trust, and the chain of trust means a doctor can't be across everything. Like an ear, nose, and throat doctor can't be, I don't know, someone who works with leg injuries or whatever. They're different disciplines. So sometimes doctors have to trust different doctors that they know what they're doing. And just like everybody else in the world, they were fooled by WPATH, who convinced them that these were best practices, But they're not. Suicidal ideation goes up after these surgeries. The idea that puberty blockers are reversible is a complete lie. That's been said so many times that people don't know whether it's the truth or not. It's all built on sand. And I think that part of the reason people are so resistant to facing this as the medical emergency and scandal that it is. I mean, I last night I called it the worst crisis in gay rights since AIDS. I genuinely think that's true. I think we've sterilized and ruined the lives of a lot of kids who would have grown up to be gay. Um, I don't think that I think the size of that is so big that people don't want to accept that they were complicit in it.
Well, I'm not sure how many surgeries have been carried out in the UK, and the Hilary Cass review of evidence did look at all this, and she concluded that it was inconclusive, really, but there wasn't enough evidence to support puberty blockers and not enough evidence to support doing interventions on children. So, but it was more that there was a lack of evidence, lack of robust evidence. It's not really there. So, I mean, it's hard to, you can look at a TikTok video, but it doesn't, is that's not evidence, kind of, it's more anecdote. But I understand where you're
Absolutely.
coming from. Yeah.
But then when you see 1,000 TikTok videos all saying the same things,
You
then
start to think, yeah.
I do think it becomes a significant sample.
Understood. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really recommend at some point having a word with Exulancic. She's a YouTuber who she was a detransitioner herself, and she's so medically like she last time she was having a surgery, I think she got into a row with her doctors because she knows so much about it that that she can't be told when she's a patient, but her she had to have an operation recently because when she was on testosterone, her bones shifted, uh, became smaller or something. So, she's been in immense pain and has had to have an operation because of it. Again, they don't tell these kids these things,
Yeah.
They don't tell kids, like, how can you tell a kid who hasn't yet even had an orgasm that they're going to value having a sexual life? They would just go, ugh, I don't even want to think about that. I remember the first time someone told me what sex was, I couldn't believe it. It sounded like the most disgusting thing I'd ever heard of. If someone had said to me, "Do you want to avoid all that?" I might have said yes, you
Yeah.
know. And these
Understood.
kids don't know what they're having taken away from them.
Yeah.
And whether or not they end up in a surgery, as Susie Green's son was unfortunate to have done, and Jazz Jennings, puberty blockers are chemical castration. They are they are, I believe, the same type of drug um, that was used to sterilize Alan Turing. And I think that we either argued for Alan Turing to be put on the banknote, or I remember there was a big push for the British state to apologize for him committing suicide, which he did as a result of getting those blockers. But now they're giving them to kids, and it's like, how did you go from wanting to celebrate the life of a man whose sexual health was destroyed by these drugs to wanting to give these drugs to kids? It makes no sense.
Do you think you've ever gone too far? I mean, you've been repeatedly banned from Twitter for hateful conduct. Do you accept that any of your comments crossed the line, or do you
The
think you've been
first
misrepresented deliberately?
the first one I was banned for was saying men aren't women, right? The second
Okay.
one, the second one I was banned for was I was complaining about a group of people who were, I think, complicit in making all this happen. And someone said, "Oh, what are you going to do to them?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to kill them," as a joke. And of course, trans activists pounced on that and used it to get me banned a second time. And that became, oh, he was banned twice from Twitter. So, so the answer is no. I mean, I genuinely, if you go through my tweets and find, you could definitely find some times where I give someone both barrels, but it's usually because they're being abusive to women, you know? And I think the way these men talk to women is vile. And when I catch them at it, I give them both barrels
You
because
can.
how dare you speak to other people like that?
Well, I mean, some of your tweets are meant to be humorous, but you've said as well on a sort of broader spectrum that every comedian is now living under blackmail. Do you think you become an example others are afraid to follow? Um, or
Yeah, maybe I'm the blackmail, maybe I'm part of that blackmail. Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting
what do you
question.
mean by
Possibly.
that? Do you know that you think comedians are living under blackmail? What do you actually mean?
I just mean that, they know that if they make a single joke about this issue, their lives will be destroyed, you know? And so as a result, they're not allowed to talk about the modern world because, you know, these last 10 years will be defined by the trans movement. We will look back at this, I think, as a mass delusion, uh, a sort of weird time that the internet hypnotized people and gave people the talking points that meant they could uh, spread an idea very easily. I think that's what this decade has been about, whether you like it or not.
Do you think that transition issues are not the only issues that we've been hypnotized over? Do you think there are other things? For example, some people say the same about lockdowns, about the way the country is moving towards, some believe, a totalitarian state where we all think this and we need facial recognition and we need. But what do you think this is a symptom of the age, or do you think it's always been the case that people have mass movements into belief?
I think this one's different because of the internet. I think that people we've now had roughly the iPhone came out in 2007, which I think is the real birth of the internet or the birth of this time. So that's like what about 20 years ago, nearly 20 years ago, you know. And we've never had a discussion. We've never had a discussion. We've never said, okay, we have this new thing called the internet. It's giving us, for instance, easily accessible hardcore pornography on tap. Let's have a chat about it.
Yeah,
Let's have a chat about what this might do to the human race, what this
yeah,
might do to our psyches. And we
yeah,
never had the conversation. I
yeah,
mean, that's another aspect of this is pornography has a lot to do with the trans movement, you know. It's there's a kind of what's the word? A symbiosis there that needs to be spoken about. But on a wider level, we never really spoke about what effect it would have for us all to be in touch with each other every day, you know, almost on a sort of telekinetic level, you
yeah,
know, whereby you're hearing people's thoughts tracked by you on Twitter every day, you know.
yeah.
We never really had that discussion. What will it do to us? Well, how will it change us, you know?
An
And
experiment. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, we now find ourselves uh 10 years into it and we know the what it's done to us. It's resulted in young girls by their hundreds asking for money or raising money on GoFundMe's for top surgery. You know, that's one of the things it's created. So
which is a double
my
mastectomy. Yeah.
yeah, so my fear, yeah, it's the cutesy word for double mastectomy.
Well, yeah, for the for viewers that may not know, yeah, top
Yeah.
surgery. Yeah,
Yeah, but my fear is that we're going to go now into the second stage of the internet, which is AI, which
yeah,
is almost impossible to imagine what the world is going to be like in 10 years. And we're going not going to have, and we're going to do the same thing. We're not going to have the conversation. And everybody's going to be at different levels of understanding of where we're at. We need to get people onto the same level of understanding that, you know, I think everybody agrees on the basics. You know, trans people, trans-identified people, you know, a lot of them have dysphoria and they need care, they need medical care, you know. But then you have people who are scared of going through puberty, trying to put it off, or they have self-image problems or whatever it happens to be that girls have always had, you know, and they need to be protected in a different way, you know. But unfortunately, affirming has been the only way that's been suggested for the last few years. And the way that they were able to make people think that uh, that was the only route is simply through repetition, you know, and millions of people saying it, and everybody being frightened to say anything else. So that can't that can't happen again. We really have to get our guard up and
yeah,
realize that we're a different species now
yeah,
that we were before the internet,
yeah.
and
Did
we're
you
more susceptible to these kinds of mimetic waves.
yeah. And so you couldn't predict what the next mimetic wave might be or what the AI might bring. You don't have any specific fears.
No,
No.
I think, but I'll tell you one thing, without a shadow of a doubt, pornography will be involved, you know? And I think that as soon as pornography starts, like basically, as soon as they created uh, a printing press, the first things that were published was porn, you know? As soon as they make any new advance, there's always like there's always men going, "Ooh, how can I use this to enjoy myself?" And I think that that will happen, and we've got to be so careful because we might find ourselves, for instance, flooded with, um, uh, child pornography. You know,
We
that might,
already are. I mean, AI
yeah,
generated images of children. I mean, it's exponential. It's a huge problem.
exactly,
I've just been looking, writing about that as well. Yeah, so you're
yeah.
absolutely
And if that
bang.
goes unchecked, how will that change? How will that change, you know, our psyche as a whole?
Yeah,
We've got to make sure that things aren't normalized that are terrible, you
understood. Yeah,
know.
understood. So just sort of closing up now, but do you see your way back into the mainstream, or do you even want to be back in the mainstream?
Oh, I'm so disgusted with UK. I'd never really want to meet. I realize now that the I always thought, oh, UK people, they're not anti-Irish and they're not this and they're not that. And I realize now that their kind of tolerance of me was completely dependent on me not stepping out of line with middle class consensus. And as soon as I stepped out of line with middle class consensus, all these people I thought were friends just disappeared. And so I don't really want to have anything to do with them again. I'd rather live here and build things anew.
And you
Um,
don't feel that there. You don't feel this sort of feeling cancelled. You were once called the most cancelled man in Britain. You don't feel that pressure, that feeling of being
yeah,
ostracized. It's not there
no,
in
no,
Arizona,
no.
Texas, Phoenix, Arizona, sorry. So,
Yeah, no,
and
they
so
don't know what you're talking about over here.
really, so do you
Yeah.
do you feel like there would be some redemption? There's no forgiveness. What do you think that might look like, or are you just done?
Forgive from my part, for me,
Well, for
forgive.
yourself or you people, you fought
I
against
don't
other
want to
people.
hold on to things, for like bitterness or anger, but I don't. I went through 5 years of wondering why people weren't speaking up to me, and then I speaking up for me, and then I gave up. Uh, uh, and since then, I've been a lot happier about it, a lot more
Yeah,
sanguine, is that how you
yeah,
pronounce it?
yeah.
About it. So, yeah, I'm
Let
just
the
gonna
rope
continue.
go. Yeah, just stop.
Now I'm back where I want to be, which is I'm actually just being paid just to produce ideas and to get ideas out there, and it's much more of a fun process over here.
Not working with any of the people you used to work with. Um,
No,
no, that's over. Yeah. So,
yeah,
would you change anything looking back? Is there any misunderstandings that you want
I
people?
would have got arrested sooner.
Oh,
That's the only thing.
really? Go
Yeah,
on. Give me
yeah,
why exactly. What? Because of the attention or
yeah, because
the platform?
it broke it open. Suddenly people realized that it's not just you know, it's not just I'm not making it up. I'm not exaggerating the problem. And being arrested
Yes.
was a good way of
Yes.
showing, no, these guys are out of control. And unfortunately, the police are working for them.
Is there anything else you want to gain from? I mean, you mentioned you like some money, but from their litigation, I know you've got Toby Young, who I know who's helping with that free speech union. Is there anything else that you want to gain? Would it not be a recognition of this cat arresting people for a tweet, which is going on? Do you not want to kind of stop this, the free speech, or do you feel
Oh
that?
yeah,
Right.
that's a side. I mean, I think that that's like it's worth doing for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that the police. I want to draw a lot of attention to the police working for these guys because the best result would be if they get a complaint from one of these jokers and they think, oh no, I'm not touching this, you know, like that would be a real move forward.
Well, they
Uh,
would say they're not working for them. They would say they were trying to protect them from hate or from potential violence that
sure,
could
but
lead from a tweet or something. They wouldn't say they were working for them. So what are you trying to achieve? You're trying to draw a line under what people say on a tweet and what the police can do with that. Is that what you're?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I guess. I mean, the thing is, if you've not been banned from whatever social media platform you said the thing on, then why should the police be involved at all? You know what I mean? They're like trying to create new crimes when they don't even have the resources to investigate real crimes that have been around for ages, like burglaries.
That old-fashioned thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
well, I know you've got a really busy schedule, and thank you so much for joining us. It's been fascinating. Is there just lastly anything you want people to take away from your story? Any warning or any inspiration, just for those watching?
Oh, the only thing I'll say is that if you ever have a friend who's going through something on his own, you have to back them up because like as I say, if one or two people had done that for me, everything could have been different for me, but no one did. So just keep an eye on your friends, I guess, and
Yeah.
make sure they'll have your back.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Graham Linehan, for an unflinching and rather a candid conversation about freedom and fear and the fight to think differently. This is GB News Originals. Please don't forget to like and subscribe below and download the GB News app available now on the App Store. Thank you so much.
GB News isn't just a channel, it's a family.
And now you can be a part of it. Join our membership for exclusive content and to be part of the conversation.
We're building something different together.
So join us today.
Because your voice deserves to be heard. Become a GB News member today.
Visit gbnews.com/support or scan the QR code on screen now. Thank you.